For months, I thought my wife was just working late. Long hours, secret phone calls, excuses that never quite made sense. One night, I decided to follow her, and what I saw that night destroyed 10 years of my life. My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 36 years old, and for almost 10 years, I believed I had the kind of marriage people dream about. My wife's name was Laura Carter. She was 34. A beautiful brunette with a calm voice and a smile that could make any room feel warmer. When we met, everything felt easy, natural, like life had finally fallen into place. We met 12 years ago at a friend's birthday party. I still remember the moment I saw her. She was standing near the kitchen counter, laughing with someone I didn't know. Something about her felt different. Not just beautiful, but genuine. I walked over, introduced myself, and within minutes, we were talking like we had known each other for years. That night we stayed at the party longer than anyone else. We talked about everything: work, family, the cities we wanted to visit someday. By the time I drove her home, I already knew something important had started. A year later, we were married. The first years of our marriage were honestly good. We worked hard, built our careers, and slowly built a life together. We bought a small house just outside the city. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. I still remember the first night we slept there. The house was almost empty. Just a mattress on the floor and a few boxes around us. Laura laughed and said, "This place looks terrible." But then she rested her head on my shoulder and whispered, "Still, it feels like home." Moments like that stay with you. From the outside, our life looked perfect. Stable jobs, a comfortable home, vacations once a year, dinners with friends on weekends. People often told us the same thing. You two are such a great couple. And honestly, for a long time, I believed that too. Laura worked as a marketing manager for a large company downtown. She was smart, ambitious, the kind of person who always had a plan for the future. I worked in construction management. My job was demanding, but it paid well, and I liked the feeling of building something real, something that would stand for years. Our routines became predictable in the best way. Mornings started with coffee in the kitchen. Laura always woke up before me. I would walk downstairs and find her standing near the window with a mug in her hands, scrolling through emails on her phone. Evenings were quieter. Sometimes we cooked dinner together. Sometimes we just ordered food and watched movies on the couch. Nothing dramatic, nothing exciting, just life. But over time, something slowly started to change. At first it was subtle, the kind of thing you almost ignore. Laura began working later than usual. At least that's what she said. Marketing campaigns, deadlines, meetings that ran longer than expected. I didn't question it. Her job had always been demanding. Still, there were small moments that felt different. She seemed more distracted during dinner. Sometimes she would look at her phone, read a message, and quickly lock the screen when I glanced over. When I asked if everything was okay, she always smiled and said the same thing. Just work stuff. And maybe it really was. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. After almost 10 years of marriage, you don't expect secrets. You don't expect distance. You believe you know the person sitting across from you at the dinner table. You believe you understand the life you built together. But looking back now, I realize something important. The signs that something was wrong were already there. I just didn't want to see them. At first, the changes in Laura were small, so small that any normal husband would probably ignore them. And that's exactly what I did. When you've been married to someone for almost 10 years, you don't immediately jump to the worst conclusions. You trust them. You assume there must be a logical explanation. Laura had always been busy with work. marketing deadlines, big projects, clients who demanded everything yesterday. So when she started coming home later than usual, I didn't think much about it. At least, not in the beginning. It started with an extra hour here and there. "I'm sorry," she would say when she walked through the door. "The meeting ran long." Or sometimes, "We're launching a new campaign. Things are just crazy right now." I would nod, kiss her on the cheek, and go back to whatever I was doing. That's what supportive husbands do, right? But after a while, the pattern started to change. Late nights became normal. Sometimes she wouldn't get home until 9, or even 10. Dinner together became rare. Instead, I often found myself eating alone at the kitchen table while the house stayed quiet around me. Still, I tried to be understanding, until one night something small happened. And small things sometimes reveal the biggest problems. Laura was sitting on the couch next to me while we watched TV. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She grabbed it quickly, almost too quickly. Her eyes scanned the message, and then she immediately locked the screen. The movement was fast. Nervous. Too nervous. I tried not to react, but something about that moment stayed in my mind. "Everything okay?" I asked casually. She smiled, but it felt slightly forced. "Yeah, just work." Then she placed the phone face down on the table. Maybe it was nothing. But suddenly, I started noticing more things. Laura began taking phone calls in another room. If her phone buzzed during dinner, she would glance at it and then say she needed to answer something quickly. Sometimes she even stepped outside to talk. Again, there were always explanations. "It's just my boss. Clients are annoying tonight. Marketing never sleeps." The excuses sounded reasonable, but my instincts kept whispering that something wasn't right, and instincts are hard to ignore. One afternoon, something happened that made the feeling even stronger. I ran into one of Laura's coworkers at a coffee shop near my office. His name was Ryan. We had met a couple of times at company events. We started talking casually, the usual small talk. Work, the weather, weekend plans. Then he said something that made my stomach tighten. "Laura left early today," he mentioned. "Lucky her." I frowned slightly. "Early?" "Yeah," Ryan said with a shrug. "Around 4, I think." 4. But Laura had told me she would be working late that night. Very late. I remember forcing a small smile and finishing the conversation. But inside, something heavy settled in my chest. Maybe Ryan was mistaken. Maybe Laura had come back to the office later. Maybe there was some explanation I just didn't understand yet. That's what I told myself on the drive home. I kept repeating those possibilities in my head like they were facts. But deep down, a different thought had already appeared. A thought I didn't want to believe. What if my wife was lying to me? That night, Laura came home around 9. She looked tired, but calm, like nothing was wrong. "Long day?" I asked. She sighed and dropped her purse on the chair. "You have no idea." Then she walked over, kissed me on the cheek, and headed to the kitchen. And as I stood there watching her, I realized something strange. For the first time in our entire marriage, I wasn't sure if I believed her anymore. For the next few days, I tried to convince myself that I was overthinking everything. Maybe Ryan had simply been wrong about the time Laura left the office. Maybe I had misunderstood something. After all, suspicion has a strange way of growing once it enters your mind. You start noticing things you would normally ignore. You start analyzing every word, every movement. And that's exactly what I was doing. Laura continued coming home late. Sometimes 8, sometimes 9, sometimes even later. Every evening there was another explanation, another meeting, another project, another client who suddenly needed her attention. On the surface, Everything sounded reasonable. But inside, the quiet voice of doubt kept getting louder. One evening, that voice finally pushed me too far. It was a Thursday. Laura was getting ready to leave the house for work the next morning when she suddenly mentioned something. "I might be late tonight," she said while putting on her coat. "Big presentation tomorrow. We're probably going to stay late and finish everything." I nodded. Okay. The conversation ended there. Simple, normal. But the moment the front door closed behind her, I felt that same uncomfortable pressure in my chest again. Something about it didn't feel right. The rest of the day at work was almost impossible to focus on. My mind kept replaying every strange moment from the past few weeks. The hidden phone, the late nights, Ryan's comment at the coffee shop. By the time evening came, my thoughts were spinning. Laura texted me around 6. Still at the office. Might be very late tonight. I stared at the message for a long time. Then, something inside me made a decision. I grabbed my keys. If nothing was wrong, then I would finally have peace of mind. But if something was wrong, I needed to know. I parked my car a short distance from Laura's office building. From where I sat, I could clearly see the parking lot. People were leaving work, one by one. 6:30, 7, 7:15, and then I saw her. Laura walked out of the building alone, holding her purse and phone. But something about the moment felt strange immediately. She didn't look tired, the way someone looks after working all day. Instead, she looked calm, almost relaxed. She walked across the parking lot, got into her car, and started the engine. My heart started beating faster. If she was supposed to be working late, why was she leaving? I waited a few seconds, then started my car and slowly pulled onto the road behind her. At first she drove toward the highway that normally led home, but then she made a turn I didn't expect. She headed deeper into the city. Traffic was light, so it wasn't difficult to stay a few cars behind her. Every red light, every turn. My stomach felt tighter. Part of me wanted to stop. Part of me didn't want to know where this road was leading. But I kept driving. After about 15 minutes, Laura slowed down and pulled into a parking lot. It was a small place, a quiet restaurant on a corner street, the kind of place people go for private dinners. She parked near the entrance. I stopped my car across the street, trying not to be noticed. Laura stepped out of the car and looked around briefly before walking toward the front door. And then, something happened that made my chest feel suddenly heavy. A man stepped out of the restaurant. He walked straight toward her. They stopped just a few feet apart. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't been ready to face. Laura wasn't surprised to see him. She had been expecting him. From where I was sitting in my car, I could see them clearly under the soft yellow lights outside the restaurant. The man walked toward Laura with the kind of confidence that told me this wasn't their first meeting. There was no hesitation in his steps, no awkwardness. He moved like someone who already knew exactly how the moment would unfold. Laura stopped a few feet in front of him. For a second, they just looked at each other. And then, she smiled. It wasn't the polite smile she gave strangers. It wasn't the tired smile she sometimes gave me after a long day at work. This smile was different. It was warm, relaxed, almost excited. Then the man opened his arms slightly, and Laura stepped forward and hugged him. Not a quick greeting hug. Not the kind of hug coworkers give each other. This one lasted longer. Long enough for something heavy to settle in my chest. From across the street, sitting alone behind the steering wheel, I felt like the air had suddenly become harder to breathe. My hands tightened around the wheel without me even realizing it. 1,000 thoughts rushed through my head at the same time. Maybe it was just a friend. Maybe it was a coworker. Maybe there was some explanation that would make sense later. But deep down, another voice was already speaking louder than the others. A voice that said this moment looked far too familiar, far too comfortable, to be innocent. After the hug, they stepped back and looked at each other again. The man said something that made Laura laugh. That laugh hit me harder than I expected, because I hadn't heard that sound from her in a long time. Not like that. Not the easy, carefree laugh she used to have when we first met. They walked into the restaurant together, side by side, not rushing, not looking around to see if anyone was watching, like two people who had nothing to hide. I sat there for several seconds, staring at the door they had just walked through. Part of me wanted to drive away immediately. Just start the engine, leave, and pretend none of this had happened. But another part of me, the part that needed the truth, refused to move. Finally, I stepped out of the car. My heart was beating so loudly that I could almost hear it. The restaurant windows were large, but the lighting inside was dim. I moved slowly along the sidewalk until I could see through the glass without being too obvious. And then I saw them. They were sitting at a small table near the back of the restaurant, close together, closer than two coworkers normally sit during a casual dinner. Laura leaned slightly forward as she spoke to him. Her body language was relaxed, comfortable, almost intimate. The man listened carefully, nodding as she talked. At one point, he reached across the table and touched her hand for a brief moment. She didn't pull away. Instead, she just smiled again. That same smile. In that moment, something inside me sank. It was a strange feeling. Not explosive anger, not immediate panic. Just a heavy, quiet realization slowly spreading through my chest. The kind of realization that changes everything in a single second. Because as I stood there, watching my wife laugh with another man, one thought finally became impossible to ignore. This wasn't just a random meeting. This wasn't just dinner between coworkers. And the longer I stood there watching them, the more I began to understand something I had been trying to deny for weeks. Laura hadn't just been working late. She had been meeting him. That night, I didn't go into the restaurant. I stood outside for another minute, maybe two, staring through the window at the table where Laura and that man were sitting. They looked comfortable together. Too comfortable. He leaned back in his chair, smiling while she talked. At one point, she brushed her hair behind her ear, something she often did when she was nervous or trying to look a little more charming. It was a gesture I knew well, and seeing her do it with him hurt more than I expected. Finally, I stepped away from the window. My legs felt strangely heavy as I walked back to my car. I sat there for a long time, staring at the steering wheel, trying to process what I had just seen. But the truth was, I didn't actually know the full story yet. Maybe it was exactly what it looked like. Or maybe there was still something I didn't understand. That thought kept circling in my head the entire drive home. Laura came back later that night, around 10. I heard the front door open while I was sitting in the living room pretending to watch television. She walked in with the same calm expression she always had after one of her late work nights. "Hey," she said softly, placing her purse on the chair. "Hey," I replied. "Long day?" She sighed, taking off her coat. "You have no idea." Then she walked into the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water. I watched her quietly from the couch. For a moment, I almost said something. Almost asked her directly where she had been. But the words never came out. Instead, I stayed silent. Because part of me knew that if she was lying, she would just lie again. And I needed more than suspicion. I needed proof. Over the next 2 weeks, I started paying closer attention. Much closer. Laura continued her pattern of late nights at work. But now, I knew what to look for. Twice more, I followed her. Both times, she went to the same place, that small restaurant. And both times, the same man was waiting for her. By the third time I saw them together, there was no doubt left in my mind. The way they looked at each other, the way they laughed, the way he sometimes rested his hand on her back as they walked inside. It was obvious, painfully obvious. One night, I decided to get closer. Instead of staying in the car, I walked into the restaurant myself. I sat at the bar near the front, far enough away that they wouldn't notice me, but close enough to hear parts of their conversation. That's when I finally learned his name. "Mark," Laura said with a soft smile. "Mark, you worry too much." He laughed quietly. "Maybe, but I just don't want him finding out." My chest tightened immediately. Him. They were talking about me. Laura leaned forward slightly. "He won't," she said calmly. "Daniel trusts me." Hearing my own name come out of her mouth like that, while she sat across from another man, felt surreal. Like watching someone else's life instead of my own. Over the next 20 minutes, pieces of the truth slowly came together. Mark worked at the same company as Laura. Different department, but the same building. Their relationship hadn't started recently. It had started more than a year ago. More than a year. That realization hit me harder than anything else. Because that meant all those normal days we had shared, all those dinners, all those weekends together, she had already been lying to me. Already living a second life. At one point, Mark reached across the table and gently took Laura's hand. She didn't pull away. Instead, she squeezed his fingers softly and smiled at him. That was the moment when the last piece of doubt inside me finally disappeared. My wife wasn't just meeting another man. She wasn't just flirting. She was having an affair. And judging by the way they looked at each other, it had been going on for a very long time. After that night at the restaurant, everything inside me shifted. Before, I still had doubts. Small ones, like a quiet whisper at the edge of my mind. Maybe I had misread something. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it wasn't what it seemed. But hearing Laura say my name, hearing her tell Mark, calmly, that Daniel trusts me, those doubts vanished. What replaced them wasn't anger. At least not yet. It was a heavy, sinking certainty. A quiet understanding that the life I thought I knew was never really mine anymore. For the next few days, I didn't confront her. I acted as if nothing had changed. I woke up early, went to work, came home in the evenings. I asked about her day, smiled, nodded. Laura played her part perfectly, talking about deadlines, clients, and meetings. All the while, my mind kept replaying the image of her and Mark. The laughter, the touches, the way she looked at him. Every time she left the room, I felt the emptiness of the house weigh heavier on me. I couldn't escape the memory of that restaurant, of her warmth and intimacy reserved for someone else. It was like living in a parallel reality. The one I thought was ours no longer existed. Finally, I knew I couldn't just wait. Pretending everything was normal was slowly killing me. So I made a decision. I would get the truth. Undeniable proof. Before I spoke to her, I started documenting everything meticulously. Photos from the nights she met him. Times, dates, locations. Messages she tried to hide. Notes on her behavior. Patterns I had noticed. Every detail I had once tried to ignore became evidence. With each piece, the reality became more undeniable. Laura hadn't just been keeping a secret. She had built a separate life. A life that included Mark. And all the subtle changes I had noticed over months now made sense. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the excuses, everything. After a week of careful observation, I finally had what I needed: evidence, proof. And strangely, having it in my hands made me feel more controlled. I wasn't just a passive victim anymore. I had power. The power to confront her with certainty, to demand answers. That evening, I waited for her to come home. She walked in at her usual time, tired but calm. She noticed me sitting at the kitchen table, waiting. Her expression flickered, a mix of surprise and tension. "Daniel, you're home early," she said softly, placing her purse on the counter. "Yeah," I replied quietly. "Long day." She poured herself a glass of water and sat down. I pushed my phone across the table. On the screen was a photo I had taken that week. Laura walking into the restaurant with Mark. Her eyes fell on it. For a moment, she didn't move. She stared, frozen, like the world had stopped around her. Finally, she looked up at me. Her face was pale. "Daniel," she began, voice barely above a whisper. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't say a word. I just asked the question that had been burning in me for days. How long? The silence that followed felt endless. My chest ached, and my mind raced with every possible scenario. Then she lowered her eyes, fingers tracing the edge of the table, and spoke. "A year," she admitted quietly. Hearing it aloud, the words finally confirmed what I had already suspected. 10 years of marriage. And for one of those years, she had shared her life with someone else. Someone else, while I remained blind to it. She tried to explain. "It started slowly," she said. "It wasn't supposed to happen. Our distance. Her loneliness. Mark just happened to be there." But her words sounded hollow. The truth was simple, harsh, and undeniable. For a year, my wife had lived a double life. And now, there was no pretending. The truth was finally out, and it changed everything. After hearing her admit it, after seeing the truth laid bare before me, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not hatred, not even immediate sadness. It was emptiness, a hollow ache that stretched across every corner of my chest. 10 years. Gone. Or at least 10 years that had not been what I thought. I sat there in silence for what felt like hours. Laura avoided my gaze, her hands twisted nervously in her lap. I could hear her quiet breathing, the soft tick of the clock on the wall. And in that silence, I realized something important. I couldn't make this decision in anger. I needed clarity. I needed to understand what I truly wanted. For years, I had built a life around trust, routines, and familiarity. The home we shared, the vacations, the dinners, the little traditions. I had believed in all of it. And yet, all of it had been punctured by secrets I hadn't imagined. I took a deep breath and stood up. Laura looked at me, wide-eyed, waiting for some kind of reaction. I could feel my heart pounding, each beat heavy with the weight of what I was about to say. "Laura," I began quietly, "I need you to be honest with me. Not just about him, but about us. About what you really want." She swallowed hard. "Daniel, I don't know. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted it to go this far." Her words sounded sincere, but every instinct in me screamed that nothing would ever feel the same again. The image of her with Mark, the laughter, the warmth, the touch, it was burned into my mind. I walked to the window, staring out at the quiet street below. The city lights flickered, distant and cold, reminding me of the distance that had grown between us. I felt a strange calm wash over me, even as my chest tightened. I had always believed in action, in making choices, not letting life happen to me. And now, I had a choice. I turned back to Laura. I can't live like this. Not with the lies. Not with the betrayal. My voice was steady, but my hands shook slightly. I need to protect myself. My heart. And maybe you need to figure out who you are without me. Or with him. I don't know. Tears welled in her eyes. Daniel, please, I can fix this. I can make it right. But I had already made my decision. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about punishment. It was about survival. About reclaiming the life I had trusted her to share with me. I don't think it can be fixed, I said softly. Not after a year of living a double life. I loved you, more than I realized I even could. But love isn't enough when trust is gone. The room was silent again. This time, it felt final. Laura's shoulders slumped. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She just nodded, as if she understood the inevitability of what I had decided. I packed a bag that night, a simple one. Clothes, essentials, and a few mementos of our life together. Photos, small souvenirs, reminders of what had been real before the betrayal. I didn't want to destroy memories, just to leave the ones that had been tainted behind. I didn't say goodbye in the way you see in movies. No dramatic words, no shouting, no confrontations. Just a quiet exit. A closing of the door that felt like closing a chapter of my life I would never revisit. Driving away from the house, I felt a mixture of relief and heartbreak. Relief, because I was reclaiming my own life. Heartbreak, because the woman I had trusted most, the woman I had built a decade of dreams with, had chosen someone else. In the days that followed, I focused on myself. Work, friends, running, long walks through the city streets. Slowly, the weight began to lift. Each day was a reminder that life continues, even after betrayal. That we can rebuild. Not what was lost, but something new. I realized something else too. Life is full of choices. Some are easy, some break your heart, but the ones that define you are the ones you make with clarity, even in pain. And I knew that walking away, leaving Laura and her affair behind, was the choice that preserved my integrity, my sanity, and my future. It hasn't been easy. Memories linger. Questions sometimes haunt me in the quiet hours of the night. But each time I feel that tug, I remind myself why I made this choice. Because love without trust isn't love. It's an illusion. And I don't live in illusions anymore. I'm Daniel Carter. And that night, when the truth finally came out, I chose myself. And for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm truly free.